most of my career, I've been in male dominant fields, working in engineering, and being a woman in engineering has been one of probably the hardest ones because there's certain expectations and stereotypes even that I've had to work through and biases that I've faced.
In a world that feels like it's continuing to divide, where we're putting up walls against anyone different than us, and we avoid conversations because we're so scared of saying the wrong thing. Through this, we've lost our ability to connect and really understand one another. As someone who struggled to come out, I know how isolating it can feel to be defined by a label and misunderstood. Last season, I sat down with incredible people, and in just an hour, I learned so much more about them and how we can truly support one another. The tools we uncovered were powerful, showing how vulnerability and listening can bring us together. There are so many more stories to tell, and I'm excited to dive deeper this season.
I am a mom, I am a daughter, a sister, a wife. I am an engineer, an entrepreneur, a storyteller, a leader, a change maker. And while I do wear all of these hats and play these different roles, I don't know that any one of them really defines who I am on its own.
And I think that's the beauty of us having this conversation is labels all come with different things. And it's not so much the I am, it's what does then society believe because of that? Or what are the expectations that we put on ourselves? It can be both from outside or inside. And also that none of us are one thing. Like you said, there's so many, but the danger lies when you see somebody and you only see the one label and you can't see the rest of the person. Are you able to talk to one label that's been the hardest for you, that's brought up a lot of obstacles?
Yeah, I think there are several. I mean, where do I even start?
Right.
Maybe I'll start with being a woman. And most of my career, I've been in male dominant fields, working in engineering, and being a woman in engineering has been one of probably the hardest ones because there's certain expectations and stereotypes even that I've had to work through and biases that I've faced. And I've learned a lot from that. And yet I see similar challenges in different labels, I guess, that I carry as well. My family immigrated to Canada in the late 90s. So I was a teenager. And I got to sort of witness how difficult it was for my parents to find jobs in their lines of work. So my dad was an engineer, and he was repeatedly told, you lack Canadian experience, and it's this catch-22. How are you supposed to get a job in Canada if you don't meet this label of Canadian experience? And so he really struggled. My mom has a chemistry degree, and that wasn't recognized. So, she sort of started to work these, what they call survival jobs, and he went back to university. And so seeing their struggles and their sacrifices was I think a wake-up moment for myself and my brother. And I ended up following in my dad's footsteps in engineering because the belief at that time, and I know I'm not alone in this, I think many immigrants and, especially those who sort of come from the culture that I do, have this inherent belief that in order to move up in society, you've got to get a good education. And the choices I was given was you're either an engineer or you're going to be a doctor or you're a failure. And so literally those were my career paths. And I ended up in engineering following my dad's footsteps. They didn't paint a gendered view of profession. Like my parents never told me, you can't be as good an engineer because you're a girl. So I think in a way that almost when I went out into the real world, it was like surprised, right? It's like, what? People think that?
Yeah.
My parents never told me that.
Right.
Like, what's going on?
Shocking.
It's
Yeah.
shocking. And I think I really took my time to find a passion for it. It's not that I didn't enjoy the subjects. I actually topped physics and math in high school. And so it was like, okay, that's just a natural choice for you to go into these fields.
Right.
But I did find that it was very much a learned passion for me. And I didn't find that passion until I started working in the field. And I remember when I first moved up to Fort McMurray for my first job, there were a lot of people in my network who would advise me not to do it, even trusted family members who would say things like, Fort Mac is male dominated, it's not a safe place for you to be as a young single woman and a woman of color. I can be a stubborn person. So I think my stubbornness still drove me to move up there because I really believed in getting hands-on experience in my field. And so I made the move. And then when I got there, there were other labels, right? As a woman, you're told you need to get a tough skin. It's just the way things are here. Don't ever show your emotions. Don't ever cry. If you're gonna cry, like, oh my God, go to the bathroom, just toughen up. So that was something that I kind of carried as a conditioning, and it wasn't until I stepped into leadership roles, moving from technical to leadership, that I realized that I'm going to completely have to unlearn that conditioning and start connecting with people. And people are whole beings, right? It's not just the label of whatever technical role you have. You come in as a whole person, right? And you have your own desires and interests and motivations and skills and also emotions, and how do you connect to this person as a whole person as opposed to just put on a game face.
Yeah. Can you take us a little deeper into being at Fort Mac? Like, you had all these people warning you, and then you go there, and what is it like?
When you said how did it feel, the first thing that came to mind is cold.
Yeah.
Because I literally just moved from India, a couple of years before that, where it was like plus 40, and then here I am going into minus 40.
Yeah.
And there were also situations where I wouldn't feel safe, and I didn't speak up. And in my mind, I was like, there's the physical safety, right? Like having my protective gear and all of that stuff. But then being the only woman in a room of 30 men, there's this feeling in your body where it felt constrictive for me.
Okay.
And I didn't know how to sort of speak up about that.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to call out things that were inappropriate. Now looking back, I know they were inappropriate, but because of this conditioning of just put a tough skin on, put on a thick skin, don't take it personally, just do your job, put your head down, get the job done. I didn't speak up about the issues that I know I should have. And I think I still carry some guilt about that, because I think about the other women who were sort of following in my footsteps, right, as I kind of progressed, and the younger women that started in the field. And it's like, well, this needs to be a safe environment for everyone. And if I didn't feel safe to speak up, and if other women don't feel safe to speak up about these things, the problem's just going to perpetuate and continue.
Which is a hard thing to do when you're in that situation. You're young, you're new, you're thrown into like something that's different for you than anything you've been in, and you want to excel at your career, and all of those things can quiet your voice so easily.
I know I'm not alone in that experience, and I also know the fear of speaking up, because you don't want to be seen as a troublemaker.
Yeah.
You don't want to be seen as someone that's just not a team player who could get the job done. And as such, you're navigating other stereotypes or biases about you being there, because the technical skills get questioned too. And it's like, well, no, I am competent in my job and I know what I'm doing. And you're kind of then forced to have to prove yourself. And so you're picking your battles now, right? It's like, I'm just going to do my job, and I need you to believe that I know how to do my job.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to let this thing slide, but this is important to me. So you start to pick your battles, and then you realize that it just breeds toxicity.
Yeah. Because there will be men watching this, and men who are curious and open and want to do better. If you're comfortable, can you go into like, what are things that you wish you spoke to that you didn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it starts even with the smallest and simplest things. So this example of being in a room of 30 men and it's me.
Right.
If you're a man watching this, and if you're like, what could I do to make someone like that feel safe, who's the only, it's just noticing the patterns in the meeting, right? If the only woman in the room keeps getting interrupted, then, let's just speak up and say, let's let Jasmine finish her sentence. That automatically creates an environment where there's safety now, right? Where the person goes, oh, I guess my voice is welcome.
Right.
I can speak up. If you notice other men kind of checking her out as she walks in, you know, and that's clearly inappropriate, it's not like she's not going to pick up on that.
Yeah.
Right? So again, to be able to be an ally in that moment is to redirect that and talk about her technical skills, her actual competencies that she's bringing to the job,
Right.
as opposed to her looks.
Yeah.
And if it's appropriate, have a private conversation with that individual to say, hey, I noticed that. I think that made people uncomfortable. Let's not do that here.
Yeah.
Right? Or if it's bad enough, you know, maybe you do have to take the individual aside, start coaching them, maybe even get HR involved if it warrants that, right? So those types of actions, I think, are really necessary.
I think that's important to talk about too, because a lot of people do want to help and want to be better, but they don't quite understand the how and what are the specific examples. And I know I had a conversation with one of my male friends a while ago, and he just had a realization come to him. He's like, I have never been scared to walk home at night. And we had a great conversation, and he said to me, like, what can I do in those situations? He's like, I didn't realize that you get nervous. And that's because there's a physical part of it too. So when that person is checking that girl out, there is a safety component. It's not just like, oh, you look good, or, you know, like, I mean, that feels kind of gross too, but it's a safety component. Absolutely. Of, am I safe? Am I physically safe? And what can this escalate to, right?
Exactly.
For men to understand that that is something that happens in our bodies of fear, that is where we're asking them to step up and
Absolutely.
help out. And did you have any allies come to you? And it doesn't have to be in Fort Mac, but through your life, have there been allies in situations?
There definitely have been, and I'm grateful for that, because for every experience that I would say was negative or colored with bias and stereotype, there's also been positives.
Right.
And I think that kept me going to keep working in the profession for almost 2 decades.
Yeah.
Before I decided to become an entrepreneur. But I would say the most effective allies are ones that did exactly what you said, Shannon, was to recognize that the experience that they have might be completely different from the experience that I have. So I love the example of walking home alone at night.
Right.
Maybe they've never felt fear, or maybe they've not felt the fear of assault in the same way that we experience. And just being open to hearing that different experience and believing in me.
Yes.
Believing that that's my experience, not questioning it, not doubting it, not sugarcoating it to be something different than it actually is.
Right.
I think that opens up space to be curious, actively support, right? To ask, how can I best support you through this?
The belief is a big one. I think all of us just want to be believed.
Yeah.
And all of us know what we feel and we know what we've experienced. And nobody else can say otherwise, right? So for someone to listen and just listen. Is there any situation that comes to mind where an ally, like a specific time where an ally came that you could talk to?
There were several times, I would say. And the biggest one were the ones that were subtle acts of allyship. So the example of just allowing me to speak my thought in a meeting where the person noticed I was being cut off and just said, okay, I'd like to hear what Gayathri has to say.
Right.
That has been probably the most effective way. And then also I've had individuals who, the example of it was late at night, it was dark outside, and saying, I'll walk you to your car.
Right.
And that small gesture has made such a huge difference in our relationship, because now we get to start building trust.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like, okay, I am welcome here. So I had spent about 7 years in Fort McMurray, and I really credit that. And I'm grateful for the experience that I had, because I think it built such a solid foundation for me, not just in terms of my career and engineering, but as a person.
Okay.
And I was really fortunate to be able to move back to Calgary with my husband at the same time and sort of continue in that engineering realm, but from a different, I wasn't in the field anymore, I was more in the corporate office, kind of doing design type of work. It was when I had my second child, everything shifted for me because I was seen now as a mother, and that the label that comes as being a mother as perhaps someone that is not inclined anymore to go to the field or invested in her technical career anymore. So that was really hard for me because that bias, I guess, was insurmountable. And there's still the sense of loss that stings me, right? It's like, I think there's a grieving process of having to leave that career behind. And then there's this kind of like righteous indignation of like, well, why did I have to? Even though I'm completely stoked and happy about the career path that I'm on now with running a business, there is still that loss. And I know I'm not the only one because I've spoken to so many women who've also become mothers and who've also now faced like that penalty of being a mother in a male dominant profession, who've had to either give up their careers or shift their careers. And it's a real problem.
Do you see a world where women who are the ones that will be having the baby can leave and then come back and their career is not kind of boxed in because of that?
I see examples of really great best case scenarios, I'll call them.
Okay.
But there are best case scenarios, but then in my experience, they've also been the more rare ones.
Right.
Oftentimes I do see an impact, and obviously how can there not be, right? You're bringing a whole new human into this planet, and being able to take time off is also a gift.
Right.
And to be able to nurture and nourish this human being, I would never trade that experience for anything, hands down.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm like, I know I'm gaining something from that, and life always comes with trade-offs. So there's something to be sacrificed in return, and I'm okay with that, but it doesn't need to be sort of a one-way street. So I think for me, what really helped was my husband Cornell took parental leave too, so we were able to kind of split the time between us, and that was amazing because he also got to bond with our daughter, and he, even if you were to ask him, he would be like, I would never trade that experience for anything else, right? So I think the partner can be a really good ally in these situations too. And just being able to talk about this issue more and share these stories builds our awareness, right? As to, it's not an isolated problem that one woman here had with her mat leave. It's actually a systemic issue. Right. And that's what Stories allows us to see, is this is a bigger issue than one isolated case.
Yeah. That best case scenario, what does the company put into place so that it allows someone to have a baby and then not get put in that box?
Well, there's several things I've seen, I think companies do well. And often it starts with just that recognition piece that I mentioned earlier, just knowing that this is a barrier, that it's not just our company, this can affect our industry as a whole, right? And then I've also seen companies put in policies in place, so a maternity leave guidance and a policy. And then I've seen like the really best case ones encourage the male partners also to be taking time off, and that's not viewed as something negative. Yeah. That's actually viewed as a positive, and it's encouraged, and there are role models who do that, and that I think just opens up for allies the experience of, oh, it's okay for me. It normalizes it.
Totally.
Yeah.
That kind of brings us back to seeing people as a whole person and not seeing someone as just an employee in this role who's now like deserting the company, right? It's like seeing the person as a whole person. Can you talk kind of about the impacts that happen when it comes to you feeling like you don't quite fit the way you're supposed to, or you're trying to, like, having to hide yourself or quiet your voice?
I think the ultimate impact is career trauma. And this is now a concept that is becoming more and more widely known, and the need for being trauma informed. That's also a whole body of study on its own, and I'm starting to incorporate some of these practices in my work at Campfire Kinship, is how can leaders be more trauma informed in the way that they engage with their staff, because the burden of not fitting in can literally affect us in the same way like a physical pain affects us is. And there's been studies around this too, where that pain of social rejection is almost like emulating the pain of being in physical pain. And that can lead to burnout, that can lead to, of course, stress, overwhelm, constant need for having to prove yourself, and you just not being able to bring your whole self. That can sort of leak out in every aspect of your job. And so I think it's just really important to recognize it, and also to call it for what it is, and start finding supports and realize that you're not alone.
Right. And for people that look at it in like a numbers way, is it impacts your bottom line, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, totally. And the costs are high, right? For those who choose not to create that sort of inclusive work environment, or maybe choosing is not the right word, like maybe they have the intention, but they just don't know how to create that sort of inclusiveness. They're going to see higher turnover.
Right.
They're not going to have, they're not going to be able to retain or attract talent.
Yeah.
And there is a real war for talent now, right? And in order to really make sure that we're tapping into the talent that's available to us, then we have to sort of create that condition for safety, for psychological safety, and for being an open and welcoming environment.
Do you want to talk about Campfire Kinship now and kind of your journey? Because you're also still involved in the engineer world, where you're coming and you're bringing just kind of beautiful that you were told at Fort Mac, like, you need to be hard, you cannot express emotions. Like, what a full circle thing that you are now running Campfire Kinship and bringing it to engineers, like, and bringing storytelling, which storytelling is feeling. Storytelling is seeing a whole picture, and not necessarily what people would have said, like, this is success, right?
I'm now constantly or consistently in a place where I get to advise engineers, and as well as leaders,
Right.
you know, executives, and help them see how storytelling in particular is a way to build empathy. And empathy is all about being able to recognize our own emotions, as well as holding space for others' emotions, right?
Right.
And how that can actually be a powerful lever to build trust and belonging in a team. The thing that I'm most proud of is I also get to go to universities, and you've been part of this project with me too, is going to specifically this Coolidge School of Engineering, and supporting that knowledge and that muscle development for those who are still in university students. I love that so much, because that was not a subject that I got to learn when I was in university. And those skills, in fact, were kind of looked down upon as soft skills.
Right.
And we had this tendency to overvalue the technical skills.
Right.
And topics like empathy never got airtime. So I love that you and I now get to go in and disrupt that norm and be part of a programming that they offer, leadership development for students, and then just even coaching leaders directly one-on-one.
Yeah.
To talk about specific situations that they're dealing with, and how can they adopt a more empathic approach if that's the right tool that they need to use for the job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so much research done now, which wouldn't have been done in the past, about how organizations are so much stronger when empathy is present, when we value those relationships. And I mean, like, employee retention, like, happiness, and if you're like feeling happy at work, you're going to do better. Like, there's so much behind it, which feels really, really good that we can kind of stand on that a bit more.
Absolutely.
Have you seen a movement, a shift? Is there hope in this?
Absolutely. I think, and I want to kind of preface my comments with a bit of this idea of the label itself, right? I do think labels are helpful in terms of just recognizing and being able to name sort of an issue that exists, right? So if I take the example of racism, being able to name racism and being able to identify which demographics experience it more and in what ways. And so there's like the quantitative statistical side of that, but then there's also the lived experience. What I do through Campfire Kinship and the storytelling allows, I guess, that perspective to be more nuanced, to see that it's not just a monolithic experience. Actually, there are some common themes, but there's also nuances in the way people experience racism, for example, right? And that's given me a lot of hope, because once we can build our awareness and fluency around the problem and name the problem, then we can also find solutions. But on the flip side of that is, if the label becomes too reductive and restrictive, then becomes just kind of boxing people in into that category versus sort of seeing the potential expansiveness of possibilities for them.
It's not in the observation, it's in what am I now tying to all of these things.
Exactly. And that's the whole piece around expectations, right? Because the minute we assign a label, there are now assumptions with that label that shape our expectations, which shape reality. And our identity gets limited by that reality. So I think it's important to be able to name what those assumptions are and then reshape that. And even for me, with being an immigrant and growing up in a culture which values education, and specifically these are your 3 career choices, right? And it's like, okay, I guess that's the label that we're attaching to what a successful career looks like. And yes, let me step into that, but I'm also conscious of slowly reshaping it. So it's true that maybe people like me get viewed as you're the engineers and you're the doctors, but I'm more than that. I'm not just that. And part of this journey has been believing in myself that I'm more than that.
Yeah, there's more to it, right? That's beautiful. And I think all of us want to be seen for that. We want to be seen for a whole self and not just like this 1 or 2 or 3 things.
This box
right?
that you're supposed to play into.
Play into.
Yeah.
There's something you said earlier too about Fort Mac, that it helped shape you as a person and that you appreciate your time there. Can you talk to that a bit more?
Yeah, I think the best part about it was it challenged me to look at my own labels.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know coming in with all of those, I would say well-intentioned but misguided advice of, this is not a safe place for you, you got to get a tough skin. I can see now that those were in fact well-intentioned to keep me safe, despite the conditions that could make it unsafe. But it wasn't until I started journaling, and I really kind of started that practice there in Fort Mac, with just kind of journaling about what I was struggling with, or what I was finding success with. And I was able to sort of see patterns of, struggles or successes, and then start to challenge my own limiting beliefs. So, one of the limiting beliefs was I was just buying into that whole idea of like, well, women must not be as great in the technical skills, because that was like the unconscious belief that got expressed, right? And I was able to see, actually, no, I am really good at my job.
Right. It almost cemented it to you. There's the moments in our lives where somebody doubts us, and then you have to dig in further. And then it's like, no, this is who I am. But that's such a journey.
It's such a journey.
Doubt comes in, and then it's like...
Well, and I think too, as human beings, we're all social creatures, right? And we do sort of seek belonging and through validation or approval externally. And when that external validation isn't forthcoming, I think we have to sort of dig in and create those tailwinds for ourselves. Even though it can feel like we're bragging about ourselves or we're just kind of like making this up, but we're not. I love a practice like journaling because it actually allows you to see the facts too, right? Of what you were able to accomplish. And then you internally validate yourself. And so that was, I think, such a powerful way that you start to navigate these biases of what society tells you or how society sees you based on your label.
That's beautiful. I had a business coach once say, at the end of every day, write down 3 successes. And that has been so powerful to me, because I've always been very grateful. So I would write gratitude, like a list of songs, not recognizing and that a lot of these things that I'm grateful for are things that I created, right? Like I had a play in this. Am I grateful? 100%. But I also can recognize my success within it, my skills within that space.
Totally. And I would almost say, if I were to give advice to my younger self, or even to other women who are maybe in a similar position where they're the only, or they are kind of seen more by their labels than their wholeness, is start validating yourself in this way. Whether it's journaling, or I love that idea of the 3 successes, or whether it's even just looking in the mirror, as cheesy as it might sound, like looking in the mirror and say, I appreciate you today for showing up, even despite the barriers. I think it starts to work wonders in our own self-esteem and identity.
I never looked into the mirror till last year. I just would avoid it. I don't know why. I just would. And this is the first year where I'm looking and I'm like, okay, I like what I see. And like, you're like an amazing person. And what is behind that? I think I lack confidence, like that I had success, that I was allowed to feel good about myself. I think that was part of it too.
Totally. And it's making space for that uncomfortable emotion too. And how do we create space for the uncomfortableness of being a whole person, which brings both positive and negative emotions, right? Or neutral emotions. How do we just be okay with that? And I think the first step is just being okay with all of me as I am, that then allows us to build confidence in the parts that we're trying to challenge externally.
To show up in those spaces in a bigger way.
Exactly.
And then hope that society can meet us. Like there's both, right?
Totally.
You rise and then society opens up a little bit. What would be your message towards men who are watching this and maybe can't quite understand?
I would just offer sort of look at it from a balanced way, right? Labels are sometimes necessary. I think it's a convenience of communication to be able to say, well, I'm a mother, I'm a woman, you know, even this term that I get used of woman of color, sometimes I question that because yes, I'm a woman of color, but I'm also part of the global majority. So it kind of puts it in perspective, right? That it's not like you're the other. So look at that label as just a way of maybe naming and communicating a certain quality, but that doesn't define who you are. And I think the message might be that recognizing that sometimes these labels carry really harmful messages and beliefs and assumptions about who someone is. And if we can remain curious to look beyond the label, and as you do in your work, Shannon, right? If we remain curious to, you know, hear someone's story, which I think story is like just this wonderful way of moving from the what to the who.
I like that.
Right?
Yes, what to the who.
It's
I love that.
the what is the label. And the who is the whole person. And so if you can remain curious to hear someone's story and believe in that story and believe that that person is an expert in their lived experience.
Sometimes people can feel like women are complaining, like the only reason, like they're not moving up because of this, this, and this. They're just complaining that it's because they're a woman. Can you speak to that at all? Give examples or insight or anything?
Yeah, and I mean, that's, I think, a valid question, because sometimes people ask me this too. It's like, well, how do we know when this person's sharing their story that they're not trying to manipulate? Either the facts themselves or like trying to manipulate me even. And it's like, it's not to say that that can never happen. Of course that could happen, but are you still willing and able to keep an open mind and to look critically at what's being shared with you, right? I love storytelling for that reason, because stories paint a more wholesome picture of the reality. And I think it gives you important clues as to what might be missing. And so yes, while this one story here that didn't resonate, where you thought someone was trying to manipulate you, you may be attached to that. If you look at, stories of many different stories of a given population, for example, then you start to see some themes. And then you start to say, oh, hang on a second, this is a systemic problem.
Wow, that resonated so deeply with me. Are you willing to be open and listen? That's all you need to know, right? That's all there is.
I just had sort of a seed of an idea to bring together a community of writers and using this method of storytelling, guided autobiography, which I was trained in. I have to give credit to the authors who came on this journey with me to share their stories, because even as an immigrant myself, I would say I came in sort of with not a fixed mindset, but certain perspectives on how I think the stories are going to shape out.
Right.
And having lived in 3 countries myself, I'm like, oh, I can be a multicultural person. And hearing these different stories from all walks of life completely shifted the way I understood what it means to be an immigrant. Of course, it's not a homogeneous experience, but there's so many different lived experiences that completely challenge our perception of what it means to be an immigrant.
And isn't that it? Yeah. Are you willing to be open and to listen? Thank you for sharing that. If you were to go back and see little you, and little Gayathri is sitting right here looking up at you, what would you say?
Oh, I love that question. Oh, there's little me.
Yeah, I love it.
I would say that you're enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. To accept yourself as you are, and to accept all parts of yourself, and to not be weighed down by what other people think.
Yeah. I love that. That's really beautiful. Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having me.